I'm Maureen Bellatori, and this is Spilled Salt, a podcast on the thrills and spills from the food, beverage, and agriculture industries. This is a special edition of Spilled Salt, recorded live on stage at the Cultivate Conference in Fargo, North Dakota on Thursday, June 12th. I want to thank Grand Farm and Emerging Prairie, based there in Fargo, for giving us the opportunity to record this discussion and republish it on the Spilled Salt podcast. In this discussion, I was joined by a panel of experts who were gathered to discuss one of agriculture's most foundational yet complex topics, and that's soil health. The conversation offered a candid, multifaceted look at the challenges and opportunities that are faced by farmers today. The four panelists who joined me on stage brought diverse perspectives from various sectors of the agriculture industries. Those guests were Kathy Luther, who is a farmer and seed dealer based in North Dakota, Dr. Carlos Pires, assistant professor and extension soil health specialist at North Dakota State University Extension. Ihsan Sultan is the founder of SoilTech Wireless, a developer of soil and environmental sensors. And then lastly, Adrian Battison, who's the principal of product creation at Miraterra, which works with improving measurement across the food supply chain. So our conversation on stage at this event was surrounded around soil health, with a reference to industry challenges. We talked about profitability, soil testing metrics, carbon credits, and ag tech adoption. The episode brings together what was a two-part discussion on stage that was broken up into two 45-minute blocks. Buckle up. This was a good one. Enjoy the conversation. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. Hey. I just saw Andrew Jason like, where is she? So excited to be here in Fargo. Thank you all for being here today and for coming to this session. We're talking about soil health. And so Kathy is here as well. I'm not sure why she's not on the slide. We'll do introductions shortly here in 1 second. Just to explain, I am Maureen Bellatori. I'm the founder and CEO of Agency 29. I also have a podcast called Spilled Salt. And so we're doing a live recording right now of Spilled Salt for this session and then the one that follows. And we'll release that on the podcast in a couple weeks. So if there's anyone that you want to send this discussion to later on, fortunately, you'll have the ability to do that. And so I want to go down the line here and just really briefly have each of you just introduce yourself and then a couple sentences about what you do.
I'm Kathy Luther. My husband and I farm near Anderlin, North Dakota, and I run a seed sales off my farm. So that's kind of what we do.
So my name is Carlos Perez. I'm an assistant professor and extension soil health specialist for NDSU. And when I was a PhD student, I also founded a podcast and a YouTube channel called AgriConnection to connect Brazilian and American agriculture.
I'm Ihsan Sultan, the founder of SoilTech Wireless. We develop a range of soil and environmental sensors that operate across the whole supply chain, together with software to help farmers and those that serve them make decisions.
Awesome. And I'm Adrian Battison. I'm the principal of product creation at Miraterra. Principal of product creation is just a fancy way of saying a system engineer that makes sure what we're making is actually useful for people. And we are focused on making measurement better across the food supply chain, so from soil to table. So we work with soil labs to improve measurement, and all the way up to CPGs to actually measure nutrients in all the foods that you see at the grocery store as well.
Great, thank you. So we've got some great perspectives for this discussion, and I just have to say I love the way that Grand Farm organized our ability to have this discussion today. So as we've been talking about all day, this wrapper report was really the basis of how we put the questions together for how this session is going to go today. So this is the number 3 issue here that we're talking about in this these next two sessions today, this afternoon, and so focused on soil health. And so in the research that Grand Farm did for this wrapper report, there was an outline of 7 primary challenge groups that relate to soil health. And so those are historic degradation of soils. I'll take a number count if somebody wants to hold these up as I'm like 1, 2, thank you. Historic degradation of soils being the first. Second one, carbon intensity scoring commodity crops. Number 3, understanding the relationship between soil health and plant health. Number 4, livestock integration into cropping systems. Number 5, thank you. Cover crop usage and benefits. 6, tillage practices. 7, erosion and runoff prevention. And so most of the questions that I've developed for this are primarily focused on 3 areas because I thought that they provided the best discussion based on the experience of my friends up here. And so historic degradation of soils, we're going to talk about carbon intensity and tillage practices. Then at the break, if there's one of those other challenge areas that really piqued your interest that you want us to talk more about in the second part of it, we have the benefit of being able to do that. So when we break, we can talk about that. So jumping into the first question for all of you here. So again, I'm going to run through really quickly these 7 challenge areas, and then what I'd like you to answer is, based on your experience, what is the biggest barrier preventing farmers from adopting soil health practices? And so just to run through those 7 again: historic degradation of soils, carbon intensity scoring, understanding the relationship between soil health and plant health, livestock integration, cover crop usage and benefits, tillage, and then erosion and runoff prevention. So what are some of the biggest barriers? Go ahead, Isan.
I think from my perspective, some of the biggest barriers are trying to balance running a profitable farm with implementing the things that require you to improve your soil health, because they ultimately cost money. So I see that as being the biggest barrier, even though I think everybody knows improved soil health is better for your crops. It's a balancing act. So that's what we see.
Yeah. What else?
It's hard to beat that one. That was the biggest one. Isan took the easy one.
That's a great point. I think it's part of it is also understanding that sometimes profitability it's more important than yield.
Kathy, earlier we were chatting at our table earlier today, and you were talking about a little bit about like the culture adoption, one of the challenges that you face, kind of getting people to come on board. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Definitely. So as a seed salesman or an input salesperson, it's always that adapting to a new idea, or adapting to, say, carbon credits, or adapting to a biological. There is a learning curve. There is, there's a bigger difference between what they're going to do and what we want them to do. There's like this learning curve. There's like, show me, prove it to me, and then maybe I'll do it. So, I think there's a little bit of a hiccup there.
Right. Yeah, behavior change being a big factor, right? In addition to the other challenges that are faced, right? That's just one of them. So growers in the agricultural industry have competing definitions of soil health. And so that can lead to confusion, it can lead to misconceptions, and a lack of comprehensive definition of soil health leads growers to being unsure of which metrics to use to gauge relative health of their soils. And so I don't want to go down a whole rabbit hole of definitions, but I do think it's beneficial to talk about metrics. So what do you think are the most important soil health metrics that farmers should focus on?
We were kind of discussing that in the backstage, but of course, organic matter / carbon is the most important one, right? So that is what drives the capacity of the soil to support compaction. That is what drives water retention, water drainage, right? Infiltration. That's what releases nutrients to the soil. So, what I usually say is, if you are not measuring organic matter, don't bother about going a little bit more in depth, measuring microbiome, measuring enzymes and some other things. So organic matter is just the base of everything.
So the idea that you need to capture the basics before you try and worry about getting more specific. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So it's just to start with the basics and then advance.
Yeah. What else? Who else has something to add to that?
Yeah, I think the tricky part about soil health, and again, I'm an engineer. Everything I know about agronomy and soil health principles I've learned from my colleagues and just having conversations with them. The interesting one, I think, just tying to that and what we were kind of chatting about backstage a bit as well, is like, how do you actually make soil health a profitable change for farmers? How do you actually incentivize it? You have some things like carbon credits, which are meant to do that, meant to bring externalities about the climate into account for soil health. But the cost of measurement is just prohibitive to that. Once you factor in the labor to go measure them, to go collect the samples, the cost of actually doing loss elimination measurement to get your carbon measurements, the way that baselines are different across, like sometimes the carbon credit systems will work for some areas, but not as well for other ones, just depending on the ecosystem that your actual fields are in. It's really trying to figure out how you can make soil health something that isn't just a concept that actually is something that improves margins for farmers, and you can find a way to monetize that, I think. So I think that's one of the tricky parts about actually making that definition of what is soil health.
It's kind of like sustainability, right? Everyone's got a different definition of sustainability. And we were even talking earlier this week, there was some discussion of that's one of those things that's not real. It's kind of like, I work a lot in CPG, and natural is one of those terms that you'll see on packaging a lot because it's unregulated by the FDA, so everyone can kind of say it. And so sustainability is, and regenerative agriculture for that matter, right, are some that are so broad strokes that it's a bottomless pit. Kathy, what do you have to add to that in terms of soil health metrics farmers should focus on?
Well, I'm a little old school because I've been around this area for 44 plus years. But to me, I think you just have to go back and rely on your common sense. Like, yeah, we have 200 bushel corn. Let's get that organic matter put back into the soil. Last few years, we've had a lot of preventative plant acres, and farmers adapted to putting cover crops out there. So, I mean, I think they're starting to think more forward thinking than they have in the past. But, I think it goes back to, what works on your own farm. Let's have some common sense. You know your farmland better than anybody else. And I think that's how you should take care of it.
Yeah, great point. I want to also mention we do have a mic somewhere, somehow, for audience questions, and so I don't really have a particular time when it's a good time for that. And I'm also a big fan of ask the question when it comes up. So I see John turning around. I'm hoping somebody can. Yes, we will make sure that a mic gets around. So if you have a question that relates to something that somebody says up here or one of the points that we're actively discussing, please raise your hand, and I'll make a mention, and John or somebody from the Grand Farm team will get you a mic. We'd love to be able to answer those on the fly. So I love that some of these answers are talking about the financials, right? So because it leads in very well. It's like I almost planted this seed, get it, with them about my next question, which is about the rising costs for farmers and how tech may be able to help. And so, Adrian, I'd specifically love to start with you on this one. According to, and so this comes from, again, the research that Grand Farm did for this wrapper report. According to the USDA, when it comes to fertilizers, lime, and other soil conditioners, farmers spent 61% more in 2022 compared to 2017. But if we look at the rising cost of other farm expenses, those increased only by 30% comparatively. So 30% increase in total farm production expenses on average, but if we parse out fertilizers, lime, and other soil conditioners, that was 61%. So Adrian, and then I'd love for anybody else, others to chime in on this as well. How is technology making soil health monitoring more accessible and affordable?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest issue I think facing farmers, a lot of people measure their soil once a year. They'll send it into a lab. If you're lucky, you can send it a couple times a year if you have bigger operations, depending on what you're trying to measure. And it really limits the insights that you can make about how effective the applications are that you're taking. You can visually look at your crop, you can make other assessments and just use common sense and look at it and say like, okay, yeah, this is working, this isn't working. But being able to actually measure multiple times a year to bring down the cost of measurement is, I think, core to actually addressing this problem. A lot of the technologies that you're getting that you can put in your field and measure irrigation is definitely helping and moving the way there, but we need to make soil measurement as a whole more accessible. So that would mean, again, one of the things we're doing is working with these big soil labs, so we're in communication with all of them to try and figure out how we can bring their measurements closer to the field. So you don't need to ship things out, that you can likely go to your co-op, you can have remote lab setups and actually just bring samples in and get them done more frequently. It's difficult to do that with a lot of the measurements that are out there, so you have to put it through complex measurement processes, you have to distill it, melt it with acid. It's very hit and miss on how easy it is to take these things closer to the field, but at least getting more and more of those processes closer to the field is the key to it. A big issue with that, and a lot of companies have tried to do this in the past, is go directly to the field with these measurement improvements. And the problem with that is a lot of farmers rely on the year-to-year measurements, so you can't just take a new measurement from a new system and be like, the question is, how does that relate to what my field was last year? How do I know what to apply? And so a lot of farmers won't leave. They'll stick with the same measurement lab for 30, 40, 50 plus years because they need that historical average. So it's really about how can you work with the labs to get that consistency so that new methods can actually be brought closer to them and actually be applied to their historical knowledge. So that, I think, is core to getting more insight. And again, it's difficult to do this for a lot of the hard, minor parts per billion ones like nitrates and your metals and potassium. It's easier for things like soil organic matter. That's, again, one of the first ones that we're looking at targeting and trying to bring out. But yeah, you can still get a lot of information from just the water measurement and irrigation and getting these real-time updates, because everything changes day to day, everything changes month to month. It's so weather dependent, it's so land dependent that, yeah, you just need to try and get as much data as you can. The other side of that is get as much data as you can, but data is not useful if you can't make insights off of it. You need to get a small bit of data that you can make an insight off of is so much more useful than a bunch of data that's just plugging up your time and your actual ability to think and process it.
Gosh. I'll add that as the company here that's promoting technology, it's important for us to note that technology is not a silver bullet. There's no one technology that's going to help you. Even our fantastic technology, right? It has to work in conjunction with your daily operations. And while we can give you inferences and point you in the right direction, it's ultimately up to the farmer or their advisors to use that in conjunction with in-field scouting. I don't think there's ever going to be a replacement for boots on the ground. So setting up the right expectations about what technology can do is really important.
For me as a farmer, historically we take that soil test in the fall. And that soil test will determine how much nitrogen we purchase during the winter or what our inputs that we need to prepay for in the winter. So, what value is that going to bring me throughout the year when I've already purchased most of my inputs, say in December, January? There's got to be a value back to the farm for me.
And Kathy, thanks for bringing that out, because using these numbers is important. Sometimes we're just taking soil samples, we're measuring things, but not actually using that. So using the organic matter amount to use that as a credit. So one of the questions we had in the backstage was, how do we make organic matter to pay off? So that's the easy one. So organic matter contains nitrogen, which will be released to the soil by microbes, which then crops can uptake that. So use that as a credit, use that number.
So I love what I'm hearing there. Data's not useful if you can't get insights from it, right? And then echoed by Ihsan too, that technology is not a silver bullet and it's up to the farmer to leverage it. But Kathy, I think you make a good point too about the idea that in some cases, these things are so ingrained, these behaviors are so ingrained, like like you said, I make this purchase once a year, and it's based on that fall measurement, and so that's why I do it once a year. So what's the answer, right? I mean, like, of course it'd be great to have that information more frequently and have the data more often if there is a benefit to be able to leverage from it. So what's the way? I mean, is it just that we need to really think differently about the way that we have farmed before, and instead of buying once a year, do you buy twice a year? Do you eventually move to 4 times a year? I mean, what does that look like?
You know, for us, the best cash discounts are to pay early, and that's your best value on buying, purchasing, and. So, I mean, you know, up front, you're going to want to speak for or pay for your nitrogen ahead of time. That is probably one of the bigger costs that we have on the farm. Yeah, you know, we do fertilizer mapping now. I mean, there's different ways that we're using this technology. And, you know, like you say, organic matter, that credit in nitrogen, that's real. We've experienced that the last few years, like with all these wonderful corn crops that we've been getting. Like, that's definitely a positive in our you know, program. So, yeah, I don't know how you use that. Like, you know, we can do split applications of nitrogen in the summer, of course, but actually, you know, we have some ground that you don't know if you're going to get back on. So you do put all that nitrogen on up front. So it's like, it depends on what the farmer's situation is.
Definitely. I think the big one too is like, I'm curious how much of a practice is there because of the cost of measurement. You know, how, if you could get out more and test again in the spring and assess, like, is that nitrogen sitting well? Is it just washed away? Would another application help yield, help margins, give you a bigger return than the actual investment? Again, not an agronomist, engineer here. But really, it's like, if that is more available, then, you know, are there changes you can make? I think that is a question. Like, it's something that we want to find out, because it is just something that is limiting right now in the industry from the lab perspective. And then the other part of that as well is you look at carbon credits and the incentives there. It's just again, sometimes that system works for some people if they meet the certain baseline requirements, and when you actually look at the ads, they don't need to do as much measurement. But if you have to do measurement frequently to prove that you have made these carbon sequestrations, then you really don't get as much of an incentive to join these programs. And so, yeah.
So I sell for Pivot Bio, a biological company. They have that equation figured out. So they took the simplicity and gave that to the grower, to the salesperson that's selling Pivot Bio. Not all companies are like that. So, you know, that's kind of a, but, you know, I do like the story of being able to say we're reducing our synthetic nitrogen on our acres and we're using a biological. I mean, that is a really nice story to tell when you're a farmer and you want to be a good steward of that land. So.
Yeah. Yep. Great point. Anybody else? Anything to add on that?
Well, if you have continuous monitoring of your fields, is there a case to be more dynamic, and even where you might have to go and backfill nitrogen because you've leached it, and you can infer that from excessive rain or moisture events? Do you think that's practical, you know, on a day-to-day basis? Okay. We like to hear that, right, as technologists, but if you can't get out there and do it as a farmer, then it's in vain for both of us.
Right. The idea of don't collect the data unless you have a need for it, right? We're not just collecting it for the fun of it.
And perhaps you don't know what you don't know. So there's a case for having technology out there. And even if you don't make a decision from it in year one, you look back and see different trends that you might not have anticipated. And you can use that as a basis for altering your decision making moving forward. Maybe.
And I hope someday that these biologicals maybe will replace some of that in-season nitrogen need. Like, that's like a nice hope and a nice wish for a lot of growers, because we wear a lot of hats in the summer. And that split nitrogen application is another application that you have to do on top of all the other many things that a grower is doing. So, let's hope that it makes our lives a little more simpler, a little more cost effective, saves us some time. That's what, my hope is for that.
Yep.
I think that's what we all want for the farmers. John was raising his hand out there. Did you spot a question?
I've got a question myself.
Okay, great. Let's hear it.
So kind of a two-parter. Number one for Kathy, you talked about show me, prove it to me that it works. What actually proves that? What are you looking for when it comes to materials from these companies? What moves the needle?
As you mean a soil test or the microbe probes in the soil? Is that what you're getting at?
When you're looking at trying new products, like
Oh.
Pivot or others, like what actually gets you to do it?
I like to see data that backs it. Carl Peterson is sitting in the audience. He has the biggest replicated plot that I know of. He puts a lot of work into biologicals, so I trust his expertise. I like to see things grown on our own farm and used on our own farm and practiced on our own farm before I sell it. So, that's where I get prove it to me before it works.
Gotcha. And second question, kind of for the rest of the panel, you talked a little bit about your technology. Could you tell us what you're using, what kind of practices you're enabling, things along those lines?
For biologicals, we're mostly Pivot Bio. We've used a product called Tune Up this year on a few acres just as a side-by-side in our field. I like to use a lot of seed technology on our farm. A lot of our whole farm is a test plot. We do side-by-sides throughout the whole farm, whether it's two hybrids against each other, seed treatments against another seed treatment. That's the kind of data that I like to use when I collect from this following year. So.
How are you doing that planning? You said it's like you're testing all over your farm. What are you using? Any tools? Are you getting recommendations from someone?
So we use precision planting on our farm, and we use a split planter. So I can go in there with hybrid A on half the planter, hybrid B on half the planter, and my field view will track that all year. And then when I combine it next fall, that data will be collected from my combine on yield, the yield differences. Field view will give you your soils, how much it rained. You name it. You can pull that data off a field view for a certain field, or you can pinpoint it down to 10 acres if you want to. So.
How about the rest of the team here? And Carlos, we haven't heard much from you, so I'm going to call on you on this one. But kind of building on that, about that idea of what do you hear in terms of this concept of prove it to me? What is the proof?
Yeah, no, I'm a huge supporter of on-farm research, and one of the things we're trying to do here in North Dakota is to deploy an on-farm research network. So farmers can learn with their peers, so they can use their peers as a part of the trust process in there, right? So I think testing these things on farm is probably the best way to validate these technologies. We know that putting cover crops out there is not easy, right? It's not one size fits all. Same thing when you want to minimize tillage or move to strip tillage or perhaps no tillage, which we know is a challenge. Fertilizer application, there's the challenge of logistics in there. Of course, we want the farmers to do the best they can to improve efficiency, to increase sustainability, to improve soil health, but sometimes that's not practical. And as a soil health specialist, I do understand that, right? So I don't get mad to farmers if they are not doing what I think they should be doing, because I understand that in the real life, it's different, right? So on-farm research, I think, is one of the ways to go. Building a network of farmers across the state, for example, so they can share what they're finding is critical for that.
I think relevant to this discussion, we see our customers using tools like ours to ensure they don't over-apply. Now there's a baseline of what you have to do. If you have pest, disease in the field, you have to do something, and you just don't want to do more than you need to. So using things like wind in my field, if I'm going to make the decision to do an aerial application at $17 an acre, let's make sure, A, I don't waste that money from my pocketbook, and B, I'm not applying unnecessarily. Same with moisture. You can infer a lot. You know, even in dry land situations where you're not controlling irrigation, it's still going to help you to decide, can I take action in this field? Shall I move my equipment there? So sometimes it takes a bit of a jump to understand how our technology might be used, but it's really rewarding to see when that jump is made, because it typically pays back immediately.
Right. Yeah. Anything to add, Adrian?
Yeah, just in terms of the technology we use, so we're working mostly with soil labs right now, so your waypoints, your ANLs, we're going to them to actually try and build up processes that we can then take to the field. So we are currently, again, putting together pilots to put some remote labs in place. We're talking with indigenous tribes, innovation centers, some of the Global South to actually start these remote lab pilots that can bring that closer to the field. And again, the big one is really understanding, where it's applicable. If you're only doing one measurement a year and it's not going to be beneficial to do multiple, then it doesn't make sense. There's some farmers that do side dress and need those measurements to actually figure out those applications, and there's different scenarios. And so we are really working on just actually bringing that closer to the field with those soil labs.
Yeah, that's great. Again, I'm going to encourage any questions from the audience. If anybody out there has questions or comments on what we're discussing, feel free to chime in here. Yep. Oh, somebody, right. We got one in the front here. Good. I'm glad I encouraged you. We got a mic coming at you.
So what are we looking at when we're trying to look at the full picture of soil health? Gabe Brown talks a lot about know your context of what your land is as one of the principles of his soil health. And so where do we start factoring in animal integration or breaking up the monoculture in our fields? And how do your technologies and research serve that purpose?
Great question.
I'll just use the opportunity to reinforce remind you of the soil health principles, though then the technology guys can jump in and let us know how we do that. But so minimize disturbance, right? So minimize tillage, that's number one. And the reason for that, our number 7 item in there is
Erosion and runoff prevention.
there you go. Stop the bleeding. So if you take a soil sample in the fall, but then our soil is blown away during the winter, that's not realistic anymore. So those numbers are then wrong, and then the fertilizer you're going to apply there is actually less than probably you should. And one of the things I thought about doing this winter was to open a compost company or something like that. I could go to ditches, just bag it and sell it, right? Because that soil in the ditches was just rich in fertilizer. So it's and
So, but are you specifically asking about the livestock component?
Yeah, and I think when you're talking, like Gabe Brown's, one of his practices is that he has a mobile chicken coop that is in his fields, and then he basically uses the chickens as a substitute for pesticides. And, is there studies on your guys' end that are like promoting that type of agriculture and using that type of tech in a way that could integrate natural solutions as well?
Yeah.
So minimize disturbance, maximize biodiversity. So that's one that is helpful in that process. Maximize continuous living roots and crop residue, right? So just armor the soil. So these are the soil health principles. Now it gets back to logistics, right? So how do you use chickens in 2,000 acres, right? So logistics is important.
Some of these are not feasible at scale. Right. Right.
I think my comment comes not from how can our technology be used, but what have I seen our customers do? And it's really about patience and runway, because everything that you do that's related to soil health takes time to be effective, and it takes capital to invest. So I think that has to factor in with your decision making and maybe balance that against the fields that you're not trying to improve the soil health on, that are just your cash crop fields.
Yeah, Also as well, again, like the measurement technology we're doing right now is with the Soil Labs. That's our main product, but we have done a lot of analytics into trying to combine different sources of data. It's not just about what you're sampling, but it's about where you're sampling, how can you actually tie in everything together. So we're at a point right now with technology and generative AI and large language models where you can parse all these data sources and come up with knowledge about this sort of stuff that is useful. Where I see tech going in a little bit, and the earlier speaker kind of talked about this, is you're going to start seeing platforms that allow you to take all of the metrics you have and all the data and put these questions together and actually look at it holistically. From a systems engineering perspective, like when I started looking into agriculture, it's so complex. It's crazy. If you, like when you're designing anything and you're asking these questions, if you miss one component, like maybe it just won't work. And so you're going to start seeing platforms out there that will tie all these together and kind of provide that whole system look at that data. I was having a chat with Kathy and one of the growers earlier, and one of the pain points of that is like, how do you get all your data in there? And like, so these systems do need to find ways to actually ingest all that data and pull it all together. And so internally, we are working on something that does some of that with some of the tools we built. It's not ready for prime time yet. If you want to chat later, we can talk a bit about it. But you'll start seeing these platforms coming that pull all this together in that way and provide some of that answers.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for the question. Yep, go ahead, John.
Can I come back? Carlos, you talked about biodiversity. Is that a 3-crop rotation? Is that a multi-species cover crop mix?
There's several different ways to think in biodiversity. It could be plant biodiversity, could be animal, right? So then our microbes. So it's pretty much thinking crop rotation. You have different root systems in there. So you have different microbes that like different roots. So you increase that diversity. And then the crop livestock integration is just key for that, right? So that brings the animal with the plant diversity together. Now, think in the context. Context is important. It's not one size fits all. It's not everywhere that is profitable to put livestock, right? So that context is important. Think about your farm and where you are, and if that makes sense for you.
Yeah. Great. Any other questions from the audience at this time before I ask my next one? Okay, great. So I want to talk a little bit about precision ag, especially as it relates to carbon scores. So carbon intensity scoring being one of the challenges that was specifically faced by farmers in this region. How can precision ag help farmers prove their carbon scores for tax credits?
When you figure that out, let me know. That's a great question. You know, I rely on companies that already have a method of figuring out carbon. You know, it's like the Wild West out there right now. A lot of companies are coming to the plate with a lot of different things. I think it's going to be a year that we sift through and sort through and find out what company is going to bring what to the playing field, and are they viable? Are they, you know, I just think it's the Wild West. I don't know.
Yeah, echoing Kathy, we see it as the Wild West. We haven't built anything deliberately to claim to help for that, other than having a place to store your data, so that when the programs do become clear, you have your information ready to utilize and hopefully monetize. But don't build into it, just natively collect, and then when it is real, you're ready to go and monetize.
As a seed dealer, you know, it always falls back on me to get my grower that carbon credit. I just wish there was a way that we could get the grower actively involved in saving their data. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be a bigger monetary amount that you have to pay the grower. But as a seed dealer, it's like, yeah, I do Pivot Bio and I get carbon credits for my growers, but I'm the one that's doing the work, entering their data into their calculator to get them that carbon credit. So personally, I would just like to see a way that you get the grower and that farmer more involved in taking claim in the carbon program.
Go ahead.
So the way I think in precision ag is really helping you to be more efficient, right? So precision ag is an amazing tool. So you can, one example here, so like cover crops, right? Cover crops is not just because my peer is using. Cover crops is a service plant which will offer you some benefits. Do you need that in the, if you farm 1,000 acres, do you need cover crops in 1,000 acres? So that's the first question, right? So what kind of problem you have in there? Can I use precision ag tools to have multi-species of cover crops? And when I say that, it's not really like a mix of cover crops, but if I have compaction in a certain part of my field, can I use like turnips and radish only in there because I have that compaction problem in there? I have areas that are prone to erosion, so then I can come up with a grass like a cereal rye. Can I use a cereal rye where I may have more erosion, right? So precision ag is a great tool for that, which means you're being more efficient, you are using less external inputs, and then perhaps you are still producing the same amount of grain, which means your CI score will be lower. Right? So I think that's kind of the whole process. Precision ag is an excellent tool for us to be a little bit more, to be smarter in the way we implement these practices.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm relieved that to hear, a couple of you say that you're just as confused with carbon credits. Maybe not, you didn't use the word confused. I'm using the word confused. There's many aspects of agriculture that I have the pleasure of learning about from the work that I do at my brand building firm, and carbon credits and the carbon intensity scores and that sort of thing is just mystifying to me. And so it's great to, Carlos, I think that was great to, have a little bit more color from you there. Anybody else have anything else to add on that, or any other specific questions from the audience on that topic?
Yeah, I can add a bit. Just from the measurement perspective, again, the ideal carbon credit scheme is you'd have measurements throughout. You'd have
Right.
comprehensive measurements of your entire field. It's this beautiful world you live in where it doesn't cost that much. It adds to your margins. You get paid adequately for it. To me, that's the dream system. How you get there, again, it's a journey. You're never going to get that. Most soil sampling routines right now are just grid-based, and that feeds into your different zone and precision ag systems. There's ways, again, that you can look at this to build more optimized sampling recommendations based off of the actual topography of your land, the hydrology of your land. Soil as a whole is like the center of all these different ologies: geology, hydrology, topology. It is this meeting point of all these: biology, for feedstock, microbiology. And so finding ways to actually optimize across all those is something that is essential to get to that solution. And again, I think it comes in the form of using where we are now with technology, using LLMs and these new AI tools to actually pull all this data together in a way that's meaningful. Data for data's sake is not helpful. You need to actually find ways to learn off of that. And so I think, again, one, we need to bring down the cost of measurement and find measurement schemes that are useful. For the carbon credit schemes we have, a lot of them rely on baseline measurements that are just equations based off of practices and different measurements. It doesn't always work out for everyone, from what I've heard as well. I've talked to certain growers who are like, yeah, my baseline is already, I'm above that baseline already. When I look at the baseline, then get a measurement, I'm paying them money.
I've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
And so now it doesn't count.
And so it's how do you find a way to create measurement schemes and carbon credit schemes that use the proper baselines and that sort of stuff. So I think that's where we need to go with it. And again, trying to build towards that.
Yeah. That's great. One of the things that I was at the Agrophotonics Summit earlier this week, which was fantastic. And one of the things that one of the panelists was talking about was the idea of using technology to be able to quantify the gut feel that farmers have. I grew up on a dairy farm, and that really hit home the idea of farmers just have this, I wish I don't have the hands to lick my finger and stick it up in the air, but literally sometimes you just know when to do something because you just know from the experience, right? And so there was a discussion there, and I think that I'm hearing it echoed in a lot of what is being discussed in this line of discussion right now, too, of this idea of having technology help us be able to quantify that gut feeling that farmers naturally have based on experience, which is going to just make farming that much more approachable and possible for future generations, which is great. So we have to break here and split for our second half. And so when we come back, I want to switch this over. And I think a good place to start is kind of building off of what we were just talking about with the idea of applicable data. And so we'll come back starting there, turning soil health data into practical decisions. So thank you very much. If you made it this far, then you got through the first half of the discussion on stage live at the Cultivate conference on Thursday, June 12th. We're just about to go into the second segment of the discussion that we had. There are some components of this that are slightly repetitive because there were new folks in the audience for the second part of the discussion, but still a lot of continued new, interesting content that we brought to the stage. Enjoy. All right, we're going to jump right back in here. Try and stay on time as much as possible with this. So it's 3:15 now. We're going to take this until 4 o'clock. For anybody who wasn't here for part one of this discussion, we're here for soil health for the next 45 minutes. I'm Maureen Bellatori. I'm the founder and CEO of Agency 29. We work with food, beverage, and agriculture brands on brand building practices for clients all over the world. And then let's do brief introductions again, just for anybody who's new to the room to kind of go down the line again here, and then we'll jump right back into the discussion.
Kathy Luther, we farm near Enderlin, North Dakota.
Carlos Perez, assistant professor and NDSU Extension Soil Health Specialist.
Ehsan Sultan, founder of SoilTech. We develop a range of soil and environmental sensors that operate across the whole supply chain.
Yeah. I'm Adrian Battiston. I'm the principal of product creation at Miraterra. We do measurement systems for the entire food supply chain as well, with soil being our North Star vision. We mostly partner currently for soil with soil laboratories to try and improve their measurement processes, ultimately towards the goal of bringing measurement closer to the field and making it more accessible to farmers and growers.
Great. So as a starting point here, we are building this discussion based on the wrapper report that's been in discussion all day today, and the soil health challenges were broken down into 7 primary categories, which include historic degradation of soils, carbon intensity scoring for commodity crops, understanding the relationship between soil health and plant health, livestock integration into cropping systems, cover crop usage and benefits, tillage practices, and erosion and runoff prevention. So those are the 7 kind of primary issues that we're sort of focusing the discussion on here. So we just had part 1 of this chat, and so we'll rehash a couple of those things, but bring some new content to the table as well. And so where I want to start is, one of the things that I think is special is the in-between conversations. And so I would love for all of you to kind of talk about, what did you just talk about in the break? Right? What are some of the biggest challenges that you face, and what are some of the in-between things that you're discussing as it relates to soil health?
Well, I think one of them was the last comment you made about your small plot getting tilled. And you were
So I have a small garden in my backyard that my father-in-law takes care of, and he tills it. And so we were saying that that's maybe not that big of a deal for the plot in our backyard, but at scale, it's a problem.
But also, you have to till some fields, some crops. It's unavoidable, and maybe from the outside, the farmer will be criticized by people who don't know that it's a necessity to raise that crop. So,
My friend Jeff Gay would say we need to till every 10 years, right, Jeff? So no, I think what is important when it comes to tillage, and just to jump in this conversation, is you need to identify problems, right, before doing that. So if you have a clear problem, that maybe tillage will be the only solution, then yeah, go for it, right? So that's the real farming. You're not playing farming simulator on a video game, right? So that's real life.
That's right. And one of the things we were talking about in part 1 too is the idea that there's so many differences too, right? From one farm to another farm, and from one plot to another plot, and from one area of one plot to another too. And so on this topic of tillage, going back to some of the research that Grand Farm shared with us in preparation of this, one of the specific pain points as it relates to tillage was the idea of many growers are not able to implement minimum tillage practices because equipment can strip planters and add costs with unclear ROI on the operation. And so, Carlos, you were also talking briefly about labor as well, and I'm sure that that's a hot button issue that many of you are probably just cringing and shaking in your boots at that term. That's a big problem. What are some of the things you're seeing? And we'll go down the line with that too.
Well, we have no-till in our area. That creates another set of problems sometimes with weed control and pest control, and so that opens up another can of worms. If they really do need no-till on a sand ridge out in their field that takes up 10% of their field, they'll probably just use whatever the equipment they have and just plant through it without disturbing the ground. So, there's ways that we're managing it even without expensive equipment. Or if they truly do need a no-till application, there are people that you can hire to do that as well. So, depending upon their field and what their circumstance is.
Yeah, and I think, again, everything is a context, right? And I was invited to be in Ramsey County a few months ago and to talk about soil health and no-till and cover crops. And the farmer there, he told me, so Carlos, cover crops and no-till is too long of a shot for me at this point.
Too much of a long shot?
Yeah, it's a long shot for me at this point. But I'm willing to look into strip tillage, right? And then if you have a crop rotation with you were strip tilling corn and then you were no tilling soybeans and wheat, that's a huge gain for soil health, for diminishing erosion over time. So it's really kind of a step by step. I will never expect farmers to implement all these practices that are friendly and part of the soil health principles in 1 or 2 years, right? It's a long journey.
I think that's a really great point, that it doesn't have to be done all at once, right? It can be small steps in the right direction. What else, Isan and Adrian, do you guys have to add to that in terms of challenges as it relates to tillage or otherwise?
I don't have much to add on the tillage, but I'll speak to the labor part.
Yeah, great.
That's one of the promises for technology, especially remote technology, is that it can help you be everywhere and direct the minimal labor that you have to the areas that actually need attention. That's the promise of it in our estimation. So it's going to become more of a challenge. It's an added cost, and it's an uncertainty as well. You get different people every year, and you don't know their competency, especially if you have them handling chemicals. So we hope that, at least in that regard, technology can assist growers and pay for the technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also don't have too much to add in terms of practical applications, but I'll just build on what Carlos had mentioned around context. I don't think you can apply blanket statements like, yeah, no-till, everyone should do it. It's very contextual on your land, and you need to understand all of the components of it. You need to look at the system as a whole organically, and so what technology should provide for farmers and growers going forward is a way to aggregate all that data and assess it and understand how to apply literature and studies and basically parse all of that knowledge that's out there and help give them informed, basically democratize that knowledge that is available that's out there. Not everyone can just read every single paper or read all the studies. And so just basically jumping back to what the nutrient speakers mentioned is like you need to basically empower agronomists with these tools to be able to make recommendations, taking into account all the studies and knowledge that's going on in the context of a specific plot of land.
Yep. Yeah, great point. Forgive me, I can't recall if I repeated this after the first session. We do encourage audience questions, so if any of you have questions as specifically that relates to some line of questioning that we're discussing up here or something that's related to soil health in some way, we welcome that. So there is a mic going around. John has it in the back of the room. Just raise your hand if you have a question, and he will come to you so that we can address that for you. So earlier this week, I attended the Optica Agrophotonics Summit. Who else was there at that? Couple hands in the room. Great event. Overall assessment there, which is consistent with Grand Farm's report, is that growers generally understand the soils of their fields but lack the data to provide additional insights into crop management decisions. So my question for all of you up here: how do you turn soil health data into practical decisions that can be made on the farm?
So this year, the practical decision made on the farm is you're looking at commodity prices versus what your inputs are on that piece of ground. Sometimes there is not a choice. You have to get as much productivity out of that acre as you possibly can. I honestly believe that my growers are very conscientious about their soil profile, and they're 2 weeks ago when we had 90-degree day and wind blowing, we all swapped a little soil. But, in the grand scheme of things, I do think they're very proactive about maintaining their soil. So, and a few guys had gone out and spread some manure that day. So, they do care. So.
Right.
Our priority is on synthesizing data. Yes, we collect 1 million things, but who cares about all of those things? It's just the one thing that you can actually take action on. So we go to great lengths to ensure that we make that clear to our users. And it's based on what they want. It's not us telling them. That's another important thing. Technology should never tell farmers what to do. It should present the data and give them the opportunity to set up thresholds or whatever other parameters they deem fit to make a decision on that field.
So you're touching on something that's a bit of a pet peeve of mine, which is I'm a big believer that you really can't develop a technology and then just force it on the ag industry, right? Needs to be developed in conjunction with the ag industry in order to be applicable, because it's so nuanced, right? There's so many different factors that relate to it being useful. So what are some of the ways that you create that feedback loop? And as you were developing your tech, how did you do that?
Well, I was lucky to partner with and be founded with 3 farmers. So
Great.
they told me exactly what they wanted out of technology, but it was relevant to those guys in Idaho. And then we had to kind of redo it. And that's one of the beauties of Grand Farm, actually, is that they give us access to growers in different regions and tell us and show us what the challenges are here. And we don't need to rebuild our technology. We just need to refocus it to serve the people that are here. And that's an ongoing iteration, crop to crop, region to region.
Yep.
So that's the way we keep doing it, and we try to go direct to the farm gate as much as possible.
Yeah, great.
So when it comes to soil health metrics and how you actually turn that into decisions, so in the soil health arena of researchers, we can't agree in what to measure. Okay, I'll start there.
Okay.
Right? So there are a few things that we agree. Organic matter is one, aggregate stability is probably the second one. But then taking soil samples for nutrient testing, so that is really important. We were discussing that. So are you taking samples every fall, like Kathy? Are you taking samples every 5 years or every 10 years? So soil health, nutrient management, and soil fertility, so they are, they work together, I'll put it that way. So they work together. So soil sampling is important, soil testing is important, and then use those numbers for recommendations is important. And the soil health per se, which usually brings a little bit more of the biology into that, the microbiome of things, we still don't agree on what to measure. Of course, we still can't generate recommendations based on that. So it's just like reiterating the process of doing this simple first. So we stop the erosion first, do soil testing, and use actually fertilizer recommendation formulas to be a little bit more precise and accurate on that.
Yeah, I think just building on that, and one of the things we were chatting about is, again, we work with soil labs directly. We talk to these big labs, and I'm not sure how many people are familiar with how these big labs qualify measurements, or small labs as well. And so there's essentially
How they qualify measurements?
like how you qualify them, like what tells you that a soil lab's measurement is good? Like how do you understand this measurement? Every measurement has error inherently. You're going to have measurement error from the process itself, from collecting the sample. There's a whole topic on where you get your sample from is just as important as what's in the sample itself. The time you sample, you have to look at the whole system. The storage, if you left your sample in a truck for 2 days in the warm sun and microbial growth has just been feeding on the nitrates in there, you're going to get a shift in your measurements. And so most soil labs will qualify themselves with different standardized systems. So there's ALP or NAPT, which are essentially these organizations that have a bunch of soil samples that they will send to every single lab and get measurements from them and get them back. This organization doesn't say, you know, this soil should have this value of nitrates and this value of OM. They basically take the measurements from all the labs, look at the distribution and say, okay, the mean is the right one. In some of these samples, you'll get variations. Like, again, my company likes to pass around this graph of one of the samples where you see a 60% variation across all these labs. And so when you have a 60% variation in what the value is across all these labs, how do you use that to accurately make a recommendation in the first place? And so really, there's some questions there. And if you talk to certain agronomists that talk about these error bounds, it's, you know, plus or minus, like you don't need to go that extra decimal place. You don't need to go that deep into some of these values. You really just need a range so that you can make the recommendations. And it's tough for some farmers because you base your entire, you know, you purchase nitrogen, your fertilizer in the fall based off of a value that, you know, plus or minus 60%. Again, 60% is wild. It's on the extreme
swing.
side. That's
Yeah.
that's like the bad example. There's definitely some samples where you'll get way tighter ranges, but still you have this variation coming from these labs, and it's why farmers will go to the same lab year after year because lab to lab you might see the variation. Labs pride themselves on the consistency year to year, so you need to really lean into that and look at the difference year to year. But the system as a whole needs to be overhauled a bit because, you know, should we be sampling and aiming for accuracy once a year and paying more for that? Or would a bunch of inaccurate samples over the course of the year for the same price give you more insight into that? When you take into account the variation in your soil, the variation in the climate, the hydrology, all the ologies that tie into soil. So really, as a whole, I think we need to be looking at that and understanding how we can make agronomic recommendations that use and take into account those error bounds.
Yeah. 60% swings is huge. Yes, John.
Can you guys talk a little bit about water, how it plays into these decisions, how you're doing measurements, anything along those lines?
Yeah, who wants to start? Water.
I think that's it.
Everyone's looking at you, Isan.
Well, we learned that people use moisture measurements for different reasons across the country. Now, there's some places where you can control your moisture with irrigation, and that helps you to decide how and when to push down nutrients. It also puts you at risk of leaching your nutrients. And then, you know, as you get into non-irrigated ground, it's using it as a timing mechanism. But there's only so much you can do if you're managing 50 fields. So you have to balance what you can control with how much time you have. But generally, we're seeing people infer from our EC reading salinity. And that gives them a very broad stroke indication. I would say those are some of the ways in which they're utilizing tools like ours. But again, it goes back to things like weather, using wind to, once you know you need to apply something, do it at the right time.
Anybody else have anything to add to that in terms of water?
From a measurement perspective, so many processes are affected by water. When conventional labs go through actually measuring their soil, the first thing they do when they get your soil is they dry it out. And so it basically stops the microbial growth, it stops all the changes that are happening, so you have a clear cut. People build out soil libraries this way, so you can get certain labs that have 30,000, 60,000 soil samples built up over time. That should be representative of it. And the thing there is that, yeah, water will affect, the moisture content will affect some of these measurements. Nitrates is the biggest one that you will see a change in. And so, yeah, we talked about this one as well. Like if you leave your soil sample that you're sending in your truck for 2 days, a week, and then mail it somewhere, and shipping itself, who knows what's happening at that point in time. You can have these changes that could affect that as well. And so in that case, it's really, we want to be standardizing that practice. You want to be trying to avoid storing those samples in their wet state, and ideally in the grand scheme, moving measurement closer to the field so we can get more accurate representations, doing it more frequently.
I think water is just so important, and moisture data. It's on the soil health practice side of things. Is one clear example is cover crop termination is a big challenge. So using moisture information can actually help you to understand what is the best timing for termination. So to make sure you still leave water to your cash crop and your cover crop won't just take everything. So that's one way is important. Another point is to avoid compaction if you are still doing tillage. When is the right time to do that tillage? So moisture information can help you in there to avoid some of that compaction, spraying, all those things. So understanding those moisture levels for your own soil type will help.
Yeah. And in the part one, we've got a question in the back. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so noting that we're in a period of grand data gathering, looking out 10, 15 years from now, what kind of prescriptive analytics do you think will be developed more similar to the tools that we see on animals that are monitoring all the time? Eventually, when we start to have satellites giving us data from space on water content, what are you looking for, or what are you excited about for the future?
I think the holy grail will be a real NPK sensor in the soil.
What is that?
Nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, right? That's the key drivers for growing a crop beyond anything else. So it's just challenging to do remotely, reliably. But I think there's steps to getting there. And then getting down to a plant-by-plant basis, I see technologies striving towards this, and it will interrelate between soil health and plant health then, to see what you're doing under the soil is having an impact on the plant itself. So I'd like to see us get there. No promises, though.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
How does field variability play into this? You've got a sensor, it's in one spot. What kind of placement density do you need? And is this feasible to get real insights where we could go plant by plant with sensors?
I think so. It's a cost problem, right? But it actually starts with mapping your soils out first and then getting a general picture. And then you don't need one on every plant. You can go zone by zone on productivity zone or soil zone. So I think it's feasible. It's the pressure's on us to keep driving the cost down. But at the same time, if you have too many sensors in the field, how can you discern between them? I mean, as a farmer, could you, right? It's about synthesizing the data. And I think a lowest common denominator. You're never going to be perfect, and across 10,000 acres, I think you've just got to try to aim for the middle.
What's the biggest cost right now that is kind of plaguing you that's tough to get down?
Battery and connectivity. The components and the cost of transmitting the data.
I think just to add to Asan's answer for the one before that, it's not just going to be measurement of single sensors in the ground, and is a problem with soil measurement as well. Like you take one core and expect that to represent an entire zone. You can composite it, but really it's the combination of that with geospatial sensing. So using satellite imagery, using drone imagery. As we get satellites that image more frequently, you have the Planet constellation, these other ones imaging daily or weekly now. You can get that model to map it over time and extrapolate point measurements across the ground, across your zones, and you composite with all the other data that you have there. So it's really complementing them together.
I think the other thing is and I'm sure this is probably what you're thinking too, is it can't be that the farmer's full-time job is data
Right.
collection, right? They actually have to farm. So, I mean, the burden is on you to do the collection. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier as it relates to carbon intensity scoring and, that sort of thing of whose responsibility is it to collect that information? So what are your thoughts, Kathy?
It goes back to adapting that practice on your farm and how much time and effort a grower is going to have to do in adapting that technology on his farm. And I think it's been mentioned several times, if it's not easy, if it's not going to save me time, if it's not going to put some dollars in my pocket, it's probably not going to get done. So.
Yeah, well said. When we were talking about carbon intensity scoring earlier, Isan, on the break, you had an interesting question. Show of hands in the room, so if you're sleeping, good morning. How many farmers are currently applying for credits? 0? How many farmers are in the room? Raise your hand if you're a farmer. Nice and big so we can see you. I see 1. 2 country. Okay, 3. So perhaps not a large enough sample size to answer that question. But based on your experience, what you are all seeing, is it happening?
It is not happening. If I don't do that for one of my growers as a perk of buying Pivot Bio, it's not getting done. They just are wearing way too many hats to worry about carbon credits and keeping that data to apply for a carbon credit. So,
Plus, many don't qualify because they're already good farmers
Right.
and they're implementing these practices and they can't demonstrate change.
There are too many roadblocks out there in the process. The differences between being paid by carbon credits, by using less inputs, or by ecosystem services, it's not clear enough, I would say.
so personally for Pivot Bio, right now, in order for a grower to collect a carbon credit, I have to go in and download every tract of land they have. I have to call the elevator and get their fertilizer program for that tract of land.
I mean, I love you, but you lost me already. Keep going, though.
And I have to say how much they reduce their nitrogen in their plan. So it's a lot of work.
Right.
And this past year, they probably received $8 to $10 an acre. Now, is that enough for them to get excited about it? It's not. So, I mean, things have to change.
Yeah, well said. Let's talk about the practicality of tillage practices. I want to go back to that. And then perhaps where we can shift from there is the idea of, and Carlos, you keep talking about this, about the idea of it's not necessarily one thing. There are many things that equate to soil health and being beneficial practices. So this is my spear into many of those things. But with tillage practices, the pain point is, and we've talked about this throughout quite a bit, but the idea of there are many regions with heavy soils, the requirement for additional labor. Programs in industry are moving toward no-till or low-till practices, but sometimes it's not possible. So what I was going to ask there, we've kind of already gone here, is the idea of how do you balance the need for tillage and heavy soils, but instead I'll pivot that to how do you figure out what is the best soil health practice to start with? How do you determine what is the right thing for you when you have various solutions that could be a place to start?
That is a hard one, and I guess the straight answer is the base of everything is minimize disturbance, okay? And tillage is the worst enemy of soil health because that really promotes erosion, right? So that's the hard one. Now, can you get into just use the major crops here, wheat, soybean, no-till, and then maybe a strip tillage corn or even conventional tillage corn? You want to improve soil health? in the long term because the tillage erases the benefits that comes from cover crops, that comes from manure, that comes from the residue, right? It really helps with weed management and sometimes with compaction, but it will eventually erase the benefits that you got from other practices. And I know that is hard to say and it's hard to hear, right? But that's what research has shown for the last 100 years, right? So minimizing disturbance is key in the process of improving soil health over time.
Great. Anything else from anyone else to add on that?
If it's hard for Carlos, it's going to be hard for me.
And that's the biggest discussion we always have. So we had that discussion, that table right there with Brady Gato is there, is a soil fertility specialist, Jeff Gale, one of our NDSU extension specialists as well. We were having this conversation. What is the worst type of tillage? What is the most friendly type of tillage, right? But at the end of the day, tillage needs to come with, you need to have a problem to do that tillage, right? So I won't suffer by myself, so I'll put you two in that as well. But again, it's really hard to say and it's hard to hear because we know how easy it is to do tillage, but improving soil health is not an easy task.
Yeah. I mean, it's comforting for me to hear you say that as a researcher, right? You know, that it's, I'm sure, felt by the farmer, right? And so to hear it echoed by you of hey, this is a hard thing, I think is a great thing to say. So I'm going to switch to some high-level overarching questions. And again, I'll remind the audience here, we're happy to take questions if you have them. We've got about 15 minutes left on the stage here with you. What is the biggest opportunity that you see in soil health over the next 5 years?
For us, it's to help farmers start gathering data so that you can understand what decisions to make over time. And hopefully the cost is naturally going down of all of those things, whether it's soil testing or remote sensing.
Yeah, my dream one is, I think that, with different soil practices, it's really how do you make it like monetarily provocative. I don't know what I'm thinking about. Provocative is not the word, but monetarily provocative for farmers to go after these practices. And when you look at something like organic farming, there was a clear definition as a consumer for me to say, like, okay, I don't want to eat chemicals. I will pay more for this. And that tells the farmer, cool, I can actually make more on this. My margins are higher. When you look at practices that promote soil health as a whole, you need to have that monetary incentive that's there. And really, where you see a lot of that come in is in the actual nutrition of the crop itself. Some of the, I think you can see it in yield, but really where I'm curious is how can we promote practices that actually promote nutrition of the crop? And so if you can grow, a pepper that is twice as nutritious as, your neighbor by following practices that promote soil health, and you get more nutrient uptake and you get more nutrient density in that food, how do you actually promote that? And so really, I don't think it's just soil measurement, but you actually need to have measurement of nutrition throughout the food chain so that you can then incentivize and have a market where you can sell food for more that is more nutritious. And then I think that itself would promote some of the regenerative practices that people are talking about. Pipe dream, but that's the goal. If you can make measurement throughout the chain more effective, you could generate systems that would promote soil health at the base.
Yeah, you touched on something that's very near and dear to my heart. So my team at my company, we work with food, beverage, and agriculture, right? And so that concept of how does CPG, consumer packaged goods, industry pull from agriculture to create demand for the consumer, right? And so the idea of organic, when it first came out and for a very long time, right? And even now, the cost differential was there because there was a very clear understanding of this was grown differently, it has this certification, and the grocer can charge more for it, and so therefore, more was paid for it all the way through. What is the next thing? And I don't think it's going to be regenerative. I love regenerative. I am here for it. I want it to succeed. it is not the same as organic, where it has a definition, right, that is rolling out and that the consumer understands. And so it's significantly more problematic in that way. But what you just touched on with nutrients, I think, is the next thing that has potential to get that pull from CPG that goes all the way back to the farming practices. So I agree with you.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think regenerative on its own, like I think there's a bunch of core concepts that is, there. It doesn't work for everyone. That's the problem. And then how do you monetize it when only parts of it work in certain situations for certain people? Yeah.
Right, and how is it measured? And again, going back to the data, sometimes you need the data in order to prove that it has more nutrients, right? So it's easier said than done, but something that's interesting. Yeah.
I just use the opportunity to make clear that organic farming and soil health are completely different
Oh,
things.
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
yeah. I was using
Thank
it
you.
from the monetary perspective. Like
Right.
that's really where I'm approaching this from. Is that it's a good example of how a practice has been emphasized and added monetary gain to actually grow and become more prevalent across different.
Carlos, do you jump in to make that point because is it a common misconception?
It is a extremely common misconception.
Okay.
So there's
Okay,
that
yeah.
mix, and then farmers sometimes they think, oh, well, I can't do soil health because I don't want to be organic. No, that's different, right?
okay.
You can still improve soil health and use herbicides and
Right,
use
of course.
fungicide and insecticide, right? So you can improve your soil that way. And actually, one of the most important tools for no-till systems is actually herbicide, right? So those are completely different things. And one of I think one of the biggest opportunities of soil health is to help farmers to think that farming is like a system, to start thinking more on the profitability, more on profitability mapping rather than just yield mapping. I think soil health brings that to the table and just kind of opens up that type of conversation.
Yeah, thank you for adding that clarification. So I want to continue down the line here with that question of biggest opportunity that you see in soil health for the next 5 years, Carlos, and then Kathy.
You go ahead.
I think, yeah, as I said, is really thinking on the profitability side of things. I think soil health brings that to the table, right? And then understanding that you can implement a practice here, a practice there, and go slowly and going up in the process. Transferring nutrients from healthy soils for healthier food, that's so there's a lot of research being done on that. It's not still clear rather what is the rate of this transfer, right, in the process.
Of soil health as it relates to nutrition?
Yep, as it relates to nutrition, directly to making food a little bit more nutrient dense, right? So
Yeah.
it's not necessarily only soil health that will do that. It's important to understand that soil health, it relates to soil quality, which are things that you measure, right?
Yep.
So otherwise we're, again, soil health, sustainability, different things, soil health, organic, different things. So I think that kind of generates some confusion and misconceptions out there.
I think the biggest challenge there is changing the way consumers want to eat. Because you can make the most nutritionally dense food, but if they still want to pick up a bag of chips, then all of this is moot.
Yeah.
Well, and there's an access question there too, right? That we still, food security is a thing, and we need to make sure that it's approachable for all as well, and that we don't get to a place where bad things happen, essentially, without going down that rabbit hole.
I think we have to remember that we're like 1% of the population and we feed the world.
Yes.
So there's a lot of pressure on productivity of our ground. And there's a lot of responsibility as a farmer to feed the world. That's our job. And we do our best at soil health, but is that number one in what we're doing? It isn't. And I wish it were.
Yeah.
I think we would have more profitability if it was. But I think there's a big responsibility put on each farmer to do the best they can to produce a large crop. So.
Yeah.
Yep, a focus on output. And I love what you just said too, that it's up to the farmer to do the best they can. right? It's not up to the farmer to do everything. It's not up to the farmer to do everything all at once either, right? It's up to the farmer to do the best that they can. And I think that's well said. Last question to close us out, unless there's questions from the audience out there. I'm not seeing any hands up, so we'll close.
I have a question for Carlos.
Okay, yeah,
Something
go ahead.
You mentioned earlier. So, engineer, not an agronomist, not a soil scientist. When I think about nutrition in food and crops, like the way I imagine it working is just, you have healthier soil. Those nutrients go into your plant. You have a higher yield, and then its crop itself is going to be more nutrient dense. To me, that I can't, maybe the science isn't there yet. And actually, I know there's tons of studies going on, and people are trying to build this like soil to table mapping of how you go from, your soil is nutritious, your food is going to be more nutritious. Is that a reasonable mindset to have when I think about soil health? Is that, I'm curious.
I think when you're working with soil health and then you are into a process of not avoiding, but whenever you use a chemical, for example, you just use that in an efficient way. One, because it's expensive. Second, because we know that's not good for the environment, but it's just still extremely necessary. When I say that soil health and nutrient density it's not like a super positive correlation, is because you can have a poor soil and just apply a lot of fertilizer in there. It's still a lot of fertilizer in there, a lot of nutrients in there that can be transferred to foods. So, it's not only like soil health that will produce nutrient-dense foods.
Right.
So you can still have a poor system, extremely relying on external inputs like fertilizer, and still transfer those nutrients to food.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I come from.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Great question. Okay, what is one thing that needs to change to accelerate soil health adoption in agriculture? One thing.
Cost share.
Cost share?
Yeah. So population wants healthy food, right? Or not, if not healthier food, they want us to, or farmers, to produce more with less. Someone needs to pay for that. Yes. And that shouldn't be the farmer.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Incentives for the farmer.
So the thing about incentives, though, is that for how long, right? What are your thoughts about that?
I don't mean a one-off incentive, but if I want a better apple, then I should always pay an extra $1 for it. And that should always trickle down to the farmer. Maybe it's a simple take, but they always bear the burden, it seems.
Totally agree.
100%.
Yeah. Canadian take on this. So we have our healthcare subsidized. It's completely covered by the government. Really anything to bring down that cost saves dollars elsewhere. If you can provide more nutritious food, then you can lower healthcare costs overall. You need less, you have less people hospitalized for longer, all those good things. And so really from that perspective, if you can, incentives can't last forever, but if you're just permanently taking that load off of your healthcare system, shift it over. If you can, if you look at nutraceuticals and the cost of supplements and that whole industry is based off of built on $1 billion, I don't know how many $1 billion, but a huge industry. Yeah. If you can just shift that and take that and just put that towards farmers and food, why not just have that incentive there and in the form of tax breaks and others?
Well, and that's our hope. This report that came out, our conversation, let's just hope that we have some policy changes and some better programs that come out for farmers. I mean, that's my hope for all of this. So.
And maybe that's a good summary, right, of the one thing that could change to accelerate soil health adoption is policy, right? Because that incentives certainly roll up under that as well. And I think the other thing where policy makes a difference too is one of the pain points that we've talked about is the idea of credits only applying if you are adding new farming practices and not if I've been farming sustainably for 30 years and so I don't go after credits because I don't qualify for them because I've been doing it for too long. So when there are programs, and there are some USDA programs that, existing practices count, but that's where policy change can make a difference in farming, and in these adoption practices. Who else has not chimed in on that question? one thing?
I think we all did.
Got everybody? All right. Final questions, thoughts, comments from the audience. Final questions, thoughts, comments to share from my friends up here. Final thoughts? I think we can be hopeful. That was one thing that I had hoped to impart on all of you in this discussion here, is that this is feasible, it is doable, it is possible, it is here, it is happening. And even though it is a challenge, it is certainly something we can overcome.
Yeah, I guess my last comment is if a farmer is changing the approach to more of like a soil health management system, it's really rare to find a farmer that will go back to full tillage, for example, and just monocropping and just relying 100% on external inputs, right? We have farmers making it work. It is challenging, right? And I think one of my favorite phrases is that, well, crop productivity and soil health are a function of knowledge applied per acre. So, and that's why in Extension we try to provide that type of knowledge. Crop consultants, they try to provide that type of knowledge, because the knowledge that you implement in the field is actually your profit and your success at the end.
Yeah, well said. And I think the other thing too, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, the idea of an adoption curve, right? And that there's early adopters with anything. This is any industry across the board. There's early adopters, and and there's this whole bell curve that it follows. There are the people who stand in line for an iPhone, and there are people who buy the old one, right? And so there are people who are gonna jump into early soil health practices and try it out. And there's been a lot of references throughout this discussion this afternoon about, well, how do you prove it? How do you show to a community that these practices actually move the needle and make a difference? And in some cases, it's my neighbor did it, or my local college researched it, or I met a guy at an event who, has customers, and it made sense to try it out. So again, my hope is that you all walk away today with a new hope about the approachability and possibility of the future of soil health. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks for coming to Cultivate. Beautiful to be in North Dakota and Fargo this time of year. Agency 29 and Skull Diamond and Heart Capital are sponsoring the happy hour. I don't know exactly where that is, but somebody with a Cultivate shirt does, and so we look forward to seeing you over there.
Thank you for listening to Spilled Salt. I'm your host, Maureen Ballatori. Spilled Salt is an Agency 29 production. Agency 29 is a brand-building firm for food, beverage, and agriculture brands. Learn more at agency29.com. For more information about the podcast, visit spilledsaltpodcast.com. Use that website to send me questions or recommendations for future guests. I always love hearing from you. Spilled Salt is available anywhere you enjoy your podcasts. Please like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.